Welcome to Chapter 18, Whole and Part Practice. This chapter tackles one of the most practical decisions any teacher, coach, or therapist makes the moment they start teaching a skill. Do you have the learner practice the whole thing at once, or do you break it into parts? Picture teaching a beginning tennis class, the serve. Open any instruction book, and the serve is broken into 6 or 7 parts: grip, stance, backswing, ball toss, forward swing, contact, follow-through. Do your students drill those pieces one at a time, or just go up and serve? The same fork appears everywhere. In rehab, a patient learning to get out of bed and into a wheelchair, practice the whole transfer or its parts. On the piano, where each hand does something completely different, together or separately. Here's the concept that organizes the whole chapter, and it's refreshingly concrete. You base that whole versus part decision on 2 characteristics of the skill itself: its complexity and its organization. Not on tradition, not on a hunch, on the structure of the skill. And notice there's a second decision lurking. If you do choose parts, you then have to decide what kind of part practice. We'll handle both. Let me show you the roadmap. 3 parts, mirroring the chapter. Part 1 is the decision itself. We'll define the 2 characteristics, complexity and organization, and learn the rule that turns them into a clear whole or part choice. This is the conceptual core, and once you have it, the rest is application. Part 2 assumes you've decided on parts and asks the obvious follow-up: which kind? There are 2 main methods here: fractionization, for skills where your 2 hands or feet do different things, and segmentation, better known as the progressive part method, for skills that are really a sequence. Part 3 is a different move altogether. Keep the skill whole, but make it easier. That's simplification. And the textbook gives 6 concrete ways to do it, from lighter objects to harness support to slowing the whole thing down. By the end, you'll be able to size up any skill's complexity and organization, decide whole or part, and if part, pick the right method, or decide to simplify instead. Let's start with the decision.
Part 1. Whole or part? I want to start with a little history, because it explains why this chapter matters. People have argued about whole versus part practice since the early 1900s, but that early research mostly created confusion. Why? Because researchers kept asking the wrong question. They'd ask, is whole or part better for learning a maze, for a piano score, for juggling, for gymnastics? Each study answered for its one skill and stopped. Useful if you happen to be teaching that exact skill, useless as a general principle. There was no way to generalize to the next skill that walked in the door. The breakthrough came in 1963, when James Naylor and George Briggs proposed that 2 general characteristics of any skill, its complexity and its organization, could tell you which method to use. Suddenly, you didn't need a separate study for every skill. You could analyze the skill in front of you and decide. That's the move that turned a guessing game into a usable rule. So let's define those 2 characteristics carefully, because the whole chapter rests on them.
Before we get analytical, here is the choice in its rawest form. On screen, a tennis serve, one flowing motion. You can have a learner groove that whole serve as a single action, or break it into parts and drill them. And every skill you ever teach forces this same fork: a serve, a wheelchair transfer, a piano piece, all of them. Notice the slide hints at a second question hiding behind the first. If you decide on parts, you still have to choose what kind of parts. For generations, teachers answered both questions by gut feeling and tradition. This chapter trades that guesswork for 2 simple ideas. You can read straight off the skill itself. And those 2 ideas are exactly what comes next.
2 words do all the work in this chapter: complexity and organization. They sound similar, but they mean different things, so let's be precise. Complexity is about how much there is to a skill, specifically the number of component parts plus how much attention the skill demands. A highly complex skill has many parts, and especially for a beginner, eats up a lot of attention. Think of a dance routine, a tennis serve, a wheelchair transfer. A low complexity skill has few parts and demands little attention: shooting an arrow, picking up a cup. One crucial caution: don't confuse complexity with difficulty. Remember Fitts' law from Chapter 7. 2 skills can have exactly the same complexity and still differ wildly in difficulty. Complexity is about structure, not how hard it is. Now, organization. Organization is about the relationships among the parts. A skill is highly organized when its parts are spatially and temporally interdependent, a chain of events where how you do one part depends entirely on how you did the part right before it. The basketball jump shot is the classic example. The release of the ball depends on the height and direction of your jump, so you can't really pull one piece out. A skill is low in organization when the parts are relatively independent. You can practice one all by itself without the others. Buttoning a shirt, a gymnastics floor routine, handwriting a word. Hold both of these in mind because the decision rule combines them.
Here's the rule, and it's beautifully simple once you have the two characteristics. Cross complexity with organization. If a skill is low in complexity and high in organization, few parts and they're tightly linked, practice the whole skill. Buttoning a button, throwing a dart, putting a golf ball, there's not much to it, and the little there is hangs together, so just do the whole thing. If instead a skill is high in complexity and low in organization, lots of parts that are only loosely linked, practice by parts. A gymnastics tumbling routine, reaching for and grasping and drinking from a cup, shifting gears in a car. You can pull out a chunk and drill it without wrecking the rest. Now, here's the honest complication. Most skills we actually teach, in sport, in daily life, in the clinic, are more complex than simple. So in practice, your real job is usually judging the organization, and it's rarely all or nothing. That means an extra analysis step. Figure out which parts are independent and which clump together as interdependent. Those clumps, what we can call natural units, become your parts. A part you practice might actually be 2 or 3 component movements that belong together. So the rule isn't a vending machine, it's a lens. Analyze, find the natural units, then decide. Let me show you the analysis on a real skill.
Let's run the analysis on 3-ball juggling, because the textbook works it through and it's a great test of the rule. Break juggling down. You hold the balls, toss ball 1, catch it while tossing ball 2, catch that while tossing ball 3, and so on. And the timing between those components is absolutely critical. Now apply our 2 characteristics. Are the parts interdependent? Completely. You can't meaningfully practice one toss and catch without the toss and catch right before it, because the whole thing lives in the between component timing. So juggling is high in complexity and high in organization, and the rule's prediction when organization is high is whole practice. Does the evidence agree? Beautifully. In Knapp and Dixon's 1952 classic, college students with no juggling experience practiced until they could make 100 consecutive catches. The whole practice group got there in about 65 trials. The part practice group needed about 77. Whole won. But here's an important caveat, and it connects back to attention. Whole practice can overwhelm a learner whose information processing capacity is limited. Chan and colleagues in 2015 showed exactly this with kids. 5th graders learn the juggling task best with whole practice, but 1st and 3rd graders learn best by parts. Same skill, different learners, different answer. The rule gives you the default. The learner can shift it.
Quick recap of part 1 before we move on. 2 characteristics drive every whole versus part decision. Complexity is the number of parts plus the attention demanded. And remember, it's not the same thing as difficulty. Organization is how interdependent the parts are. High organization means a tightly timed chain. Low organization means parts you can pull apart. Naylor and Briggs in 1963 combined the two into a rule that finally let us generalize across skills. Low complexity plus high organization, practice whole. High complexity plus low organization, practice by parts. And because most real skills are complex, the working version of the rule is analyze the skill, find the natural units of interdependent parts, then decide, keeping an eye on the learner's capacity, as the juggling study showed. Now, most of the skills teachers and therapists work with do call for some kind of part practice. So the natural next question is, once you've decided on parts, how exactly do you break the skill down? That's part 2.